Did you know that you can actually get your baby to listen to you when you tell them not to do something? Babies can understand words long before they can speak them. In this video, we will go over strategies to correct your baby and get your baby to listen when you tell them not to do something. If your baby is capable of doing something they should not do, then they are capable of learning to listen to you and to learn to not do something that they should not do. But first, hello, my name is Valerie. I blog at babywisemom.com. I have been blogging there since the year 2007, and I love helping parents love parenting. I have 4 children who currently range in age from 11 to 18 years old. An important step in getting your baby to listen to you when you tell them no is for you to understand who your baby is and get to know your baby's personality. Every one of us, including babies, have our own strengths and weaknesses, and every single baby is unique. So something that's really helpful to understand is birth order and how that can affect personality. That can help you have an understanding of what is highly likely that your baby will respond, and that can help you in being proactive and help you in understanding what they might do and understanding that's just who they are. I do have information on birth order, so if you'd like more information on that, be sure to check that out. Another thing to consider is your baby strong-willed? A strong-willed baby will be much harder to get to listen, and they will push those boundaries a lot more. And I do have a lot of information on strong-willed, so if you have questions on strong-willed, be sure to check that out. It's also really good to understand if your baby really responds well to positive reinforcement or not, which the vast majority of babies are going to respond really well to positive reinforcement. So when your baby does listen, thank you so much. That is so good to listen to mommy. Thank you for listening to mommy when I told you that. So just giving that positive reinforcement when they do something right is huge. You also want to understand love languages. Now, with love languages, this is how a person feels loved. And so someone may feel the most love when they get physical affection. Someone else may feel the most love from words of affirmation. There's 5 different main love languages. And it's very common for a child or a person to be unhappy, to act out, to do what they shouldn't do if their love languages are not being met. Now, for young children and especially babies, the idea is that you are satisfying all 5 love languages. And ideally you do that anyway. But if you have a child who is struggling, it's good to think about what is their love language and how am I actually fulfilling that? What do I need to do to improve in that area? So with a baby, you're more just, what are the 5 love languages and how do I express those to my baby, just to make sure I'm covering everything, because you won't know what your baby's primary love languages are yet, and those do shift as they get older, but it's important for you to know what love languages are so that you can be sure you're meeting all needs. It's also very interesting to understand the personality types as described by Tracy Hogg, author of the Baby Whisperer books. And I do have information on that. So there's different personalities. So just with this and with birth order, some kids tend to be just more naturally obedient, and some kids tend to be more naturally disobedient. So it's important to understand what you're working with. And as you get to know your baby, you really want to adopt your approach to correcting your baby to your baby's individual personality. You can't approach it the exact same with every one of your children, and all babies out there can't be approached in the exact same way. So something else that's really important is that you decide on the rules of your house. You need to think through what's okay and what isn't, and whatever is okay needs to be okay unless you make a strong decision that actually that shouldn't be okay, that actually isn't safe. We need to make that a rule. And whatever isn't okay needs to remain not being okay. Again, unless you make a strong decision of like, you know what, actually that's okay if they do that. What you can't do is go back and forth every day or in the same day. That confuses children. Children are amazing little scientists, and they are really great at utilizing that scientific method, even though they haven't been taught the scientific method. So you'll really confuse your baby if you're changing the rules constantly. So make sure you have a strong understanding of what your rules are and are not. You do want to make sure that you have things that are off limits for your baby. You don't want the entire house baby-proof to the point that you're okay with your baby absolutely touching everything, because your baby needs to learn how to respond to no. If your baby learns to respond and listen when you tell them no, then that makes the toddler years significantly easier because they've already been practicing listening to you. And as your baby gets older, your baby will be able to reach more and get into more and be able to get into things they shouldn't get into. There's absolutely no way to completely toddler-proof a house. And so it's good to have some things that are off limits so that you can teach that to your baby, teach your baby to listen to no, and teach that there are limits in life. You want to make sure the things that you are allowing to be off limits aren't going to be harmful to your baby if your baby does get into it. So it might just be something as simple as you have a pile of magazines that you don't want your baby to touch. That's a no area because your baby would rip them up. But in reality, it's not going to hurt your baby if your baby gets into it. And you also want the no items to be things you're not going to be devastated about if they do get ruined. So for most people, a magazine is not an heirloom. It's not something we're going to keep forever. So you don't want your baby getting into it. But also, if your baby does get into it and rips up a magazine, it's not going to be devastating to you. And you, of course, want lots of yes items in your house too. You don't want everything to be off limits to your baby because that would be incredibly frustrating. You also want to make sure the entire family is on the same page. This is true between you and your spouse, and also between you and if you have other children that are older. And that's kind of the harder thing. It's older children can really struggle letting a baby be frustrated. And so they'll want to give in to the baby a lot. So just making sure they're all on the same page. Like, hey, we need to make sure that we don't let the baby play with the remote control. Even if she really wants it and even if she cries, she just doesn't get to play with it. Something else I highly recommend is having a phrase that you say to your baby consistently every time that means don't do that. So for me, what I used was that's a no. If they were doing something they shouldn't do, I would say that's a no. So just pick a phrase you would like to have that you will say to your baby if they're getting into something they shouldn't. You also want to decide on a method of correction. So when your baby does something they shouldn't, how are you going to respond? It's good for you to have a plan so that you know what to do. And also it will help your baby know what to expect. And like I said, they're just good little scientists. And so having that all like a set pattern will just help your baby really connect and understand like, oh, okay, that is something I'm not supposed to do. So one strong thing that every parent needs is the ability to give the look. And the look is that look that you give a child like, no, that is not okay. You don't do that. Like, hopefully your child is able to just get the look and respond with no other action as they come to understand and know the look. So you give the look, and then if nothing responds, and perhaps your child isn't even looking at you, and if so, then you say your child's name and you expect some eye contact. Most babies are not going to like give eye contact, and your baby may look at you if you say their name. They may just look at you because that's a pretty normal reaction to your name being said. But it's also possible that your baby will completely ignore you, especially if they know what they're doing is wrong and they don't want to hear about it. So in that case, something you can do is gently go over and just grab under their chin and point their face at you and look them in the eye. So once you've said their name, you have eye contact. At that point, you say your phrase. So that's a no. And then you want to give your child the opportunity to respond and listen and to submit with dignity. So letting your child submit with dignity means that you just tell them that's a no and then you back off. You don't need to like stare them down or hover over them until they move. Like ideally you want to give them some space so that they can make the decision like, oh, to listen. Okay, I'm going to move now. So that's letting your child surrender with dignity. And sometimes you're going to need to have more of a presence to get your child to stop. But ideally, you give your child that opportunity to surrender with dignity. And some children need that opportunity more than others. And some need more space than others. Like some you may be able to say, that's a no, and continue that eye contact, and then they will just stop. But others may need, that's a no, and then you turn and start wiping the counter, and then they will stop and move away. If they do not listen, if you said that's a no and there's no change, repeat all of those steps again. And if you've had to repeat all of those steps again and your child still isn't listening, then physically remove them from whatever they're doing. So if your baby's getting into our pile of magazines, and you said that's a no, and your baby still isn't stopping, then you go pick up your baby, move your baby somewhere that is okay. Move them to something that is okay to play with, something that is a yes. And this is referred to as substitution when you're correcting a child, that you take them from something that isn't okay to something that is okay. And then finally, whether you've moved your child, whether your child moved on their own, stopped doing the thing they weren't supposed to do, then you thank your child for obeying. And that's true even if you had to move your child. Thank you for listening to mommy. Thank you for stopping playing with those magazines. We don't want to ruin those magazines. Thank you so much for listening. So you're thanking and giving that positive reinforcement. It's important to understand some expectations. Your baby absolutely can learn to listen to you, and your baby will if you are consistent. Your baby is smart enough. It's all up to you. It's up to you if your baby listens or not. All you have to do is be consistent. And that sounds easy, but it's hard. It's hard because it's exhausting, because you're tired. And sometimes you don't feel like correcting it. Sometimes you're like, you know what, I don't really care about magazines. Like they can destroy the magazines if they want to. But the problem is then you're sending mixed signals and you're being inconsistent. And so they don't know in the future when you are being serious. And if they're touching something you really don't want them to touch, and then they end up breaking it, well, that's really on you if you haven't been consistent with them and haven't made sure that they learn to listen to no. So just be consistent. Even when you feel exhausted, you just take that little bit of effort and it pays dividends down the road. It's definitely one of those things that like you put in the effort now. It's just like sleep training. You put in the effort now and you reap the benefits later. It makes your toddler years so much easier, and even into older kids and teen years. You've just set that precedent from the beginning that we listen, we follow rules. But with that said, your baby will not obey 100% of the time, even if you've been 100% consistent. So it's just not going to happen, and that's okay. It's nothing to freak out about or be like worried about and think you're a terrible parent or that your child is doomed to always be difficult. Like they're going to test those boundaries. It's going to happen. So, they'll learn to listen, and they'll listen a lot of the time, but you're going to have those moments where your child, the amazing scientist, decides, I need to test this out. I need to test and see if this, does she really mean it? And that's where I say, stay consistent. When they do test you, then you stick with the rules. So expect them to obey and expect them to test boundaries. Both of those things are going to happen. That wraps up the tips for getting your baby to obey and listen to you, and listen when you say no. I do have a lot more details on this in a blog post on my blog, so make sure you check that out. And as always, if you have questions, drop them in the comments and I will answer. Thanks for watching and have a great day.